think atheists should evangelize Christians? This is debatable among the atheist community.
No, it's not.
You don't think?
You can debate anything.
Oh, of course, but I do have some fellow atheists that are close friends of mine. They're not angry at me for being. Remember, I used to be I'm a former Christian evangelist, so I'm kind of wired that way. It's genetic. My father, and then of course my kids, but. I think when I run into certain atheists and tell them that I engage in conversation and dialogue with Christians, because I am trying to help them to change their mind, and I look at them the same way I used to look at Christians when I was a young Christian preacher. I look at them and I literally want to help them. I have compassion on them. I want them to see the light of the reason, not the Matthew 5, let your light so shine. Right. I want them to see the light of enlightenment, of thinking and rationality rather than religion. So expound on that.
So the reason I don't think it's debatable, you can debate anything. You can debate creationism versus evolution, right. But I don't really think that's debatable. I don't think that the opposition has anything remotely good to put forth. Mm-hmm. Because when I talk about evangelizing on behalf of, and I typically evangelize on behalf of skepticism and humanism and not atheism.
Okay.
It's about giving them the tools to evaluate and come to a better understanding about reality, mm-hmm. and then encouraging the sort of compassion and empathy and recognition that we have to solve our problems on our own. When I advocate for evangelizing that, I'm not talking about going door to door.
Right.
I'm not talking about marching into somebody's church and being a disruption. I'm talking about actively engaging in conversation, mm-hmm. with the result of either convincing them that they don't have good reasons to believe, mm-hmm. or allowing them to convince you that you do, or that mm-hmm. they do. Mm-hmm. To me, to say that evangelizing on behalf of skepticism, humanism, atheism is somehow a non-starter, mm-hmm. shouldn't happen, mm-hmm. is to say, I have my beliefs, you have yours, we can't have any discussion about it. Mm-hmm. That, to me, exacerbates the situation, because most theists that I interact with don't have a good understanding of what they believe or why.
Right.
This is something that is the result of indoctrination or sloppy thinking or feelings and impressions. I've seen so much. I've seen God's powerful work in there. Yeah. And the questions you need to ask are, okay, you've seen things. I don't deny that you've seen things. Mm-hmm. But you've reached conclusions about what you saw, mm-hmm. and that's what I'm questioning. How did you determine, for example, you prayed and somebody got better?
Yeah.
How did you determine that the prayer had anything at all to do with it? Where's that connection?
Yeah.
That sort of Socratic method of asking questions and having the conversation is the only way that people are likely to change their mind.
Okay.
Because if you set up this barrier where we can't talk or shouldn't mm-hmm. talk, then what you're essentially doing is saying, you stay with your stuff, I'll stay with mine.
Right.
It's less likely that people are going to change their mind, and it is more likely that it's going to lead to more harm. Mm-hmm. When you have people who are anti-science, mm-hmm. anti-vaccination, anti-doctors, we're not going to take our kids to the hospital, we're just going to pray over them, and that kid ends up dead, which happens over mm-hmm. and over again. I saw news stories about parents, I think they've killed 2 children that way. Mm-hmm. To say that it was more moral to not interact with them mm-hmm. than to take the opportunity to try to convince them that what they were doing was potentially harmful, I think is as immoral as what they're doing.
Right.
And I remember an NPR episode, I think it was This I Believe with Penn Jillette, where he talked about when people proselytize to them, mm-hmm. he's not offended or bothered by that, mm-hmm. because if you actually believed somebody was, getting ready to die and go to hell, what kind of ass would you have to be to not want to tell them that?
Exactly.
And so if I look around and see people in the world who are credulous, who are making appeals to the supernatural, mm-hmm. who are refusing medical treatment, mm-hmm. who are trying to institute legislation that dramatically affects the lives of other people who don't share their religious beliefs, mm-hmm. and I don't say anything about it, then I feel that I'm complicit. Mm-hmm. And the only thing it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. The don't proselytize on behalf of atheists is basically saying, yes, good men should do nothing, or good people should do nothing. I can't abide by that.
Okay. I like to say that most Christians I'd run into, Matt, and you probably experience the same thing, are very surprised that, for example, when I'm out with the Atheists Helping the Homeless, that wonderful organization here in Austin, where we meet under the bridge and we pass out food and clothing, and we do philanthropic work as humanists and atheists. Many Christians are very, very surprised that we're doing good deeds and we have the goodness and kindness in us, and it's a great opportunity for me and my big mouth to have dialogue with Christians out there. I love to do that. But I'm not surprised anymore, after doing this for over 20 years, that Christians are very, very surprised to see that atheists can be very kind and loving. I'm not saying all atheists are. To me, there are good and bad people in every group.
Yes.
I'm not asserting that just because you're an atheist, it makes you a moral, ethical person. But what I'm saying is, I think within each group, whether you're a believer, whatever religion, you can be a good or a bad person. But I like to say, Matt, and you can interject on this, if we don't tell them, those of us kind of in the front lines, those of us that like to engage in dialogue with believers of any religion or supernatural belief system, if we don't tell them that there are those people or you can be good without a God, there is an alternative to your religion, your supernatural belief systems, because some of these people we don't know that they may already have these doubts in their mind. That's the way I look at it. And some of my fellow atheists, my friends, will say, well, David, you're just wasting your time. They're never going to change. I changed. You changed. And who's to say I wouldn't?
Waste of time?
Yeah.
And by the way, it's your time to waste.
Yeah.
If you are wasting time. But it's not a waste of time. I hear from people all the time, you're never going to change the mind. You're never going to get to the faith heads. Well, I've been doing a TV show for over a decade, and I have an email inbox that has thousands of messages from people whose minds have been changed because of what we've done on the show. And when I go out to conventions or debates, if there's more than 100 to 200 people there's probably a dozen that are going to come up and be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for what you guys did on the show, because I was a fundamentalist Christian, or I was a Muslim, or I was a Scientologist, or whatever. Now, Atheists Helping the Homeless, I just saw there's a chapter that's opened in New York as well.
Oh, wow.
So this is an idea that's actually is spreading, and I'm very happy for all that. When it comes to this idea of Christian perceptions of, well, anything, you're going to get a lot of different perceptions because there's many different types of Christians. But the Christian perception of atheist is probably the reason that we need outspoken atheists and outspoken humanists, because they have a lot of misinformation, and some of it is incredibly easy to expose. So Psalm 14:1, where the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, everybody knows that part. The second half of the verse specifically says, they can do no good thing.
Good. No man can do any good.
Now, you'll get all kinds of apologetics about, hey, nobody's good, we're all sinners, Jesus can, so that's what that means. But I don't think that's what Psalm 1 means. Psalm 14:1 means. I think when it says, they can do no good thing, that is, especially after the fool has said in his heart, this is specifically an admonishment of the atheists, that these are evil people. Yeah. Right. Then you have Protestants who go to Romans and say that God has written his moral code on their heart. So, for example, I had a conversation with a family member right after they found out that I was an atheist, and I was concerned that they would think that I couldn't be a good person. But they already knew me, so they knew I was a good person. Right. And they're like, well, of course you can be good. Right. After that. You don't have to believe to be good. You just have to have a God for there to be anything good. So you get different models. One is that atheists can't be good. One is that they can, but they're only good because either God wrote the moral code on their heart, or they're not truly good. They're just acting good so that they can get along in this world, because if you act terrible in this world, there's consequences. And then the third one is, yes, you can be good because there's a God, but that's separate from whether you believe it. I don't know how it doesn't register with them that the acknowledgement that you can be good just in order to get along in this world also happens to be sufficient grounds to have a moral system. That the facts of this world, of getting along in this world, mean that there are some things that are going to affect you negatively and others that are going to affect you positively. And if you run around being terrible to people, you're not going to do very well. And we don't need a God to instill a moral code or anything else. You could have, it could be there's no such thing as altruism and that everything is ultimately selfish. Like even when I donate to a worthy cause, I might be doing it for recognition. What if I donate to a worthy cause and nobody knows? I still know. And I have this understanding that if I'm taking this action, and other people are too, that giving money to this encourages this sort of behavior, and the world is ultimately better because of it. And if the world gets better, I benefit from that. So you could say that all of my motivations are selfish, and they would still be good, and potentially great. Because if all I want is to have the best world for me, I still have to make decisions that lead to that best world. And since I don't know if I'm going to live for another year, another 10 years, another 50 years, which now we're starting to push it, but it's in my interest to think longer term and to act in the short term, kind of like Gandhi's think globally, act locally type thing. And when Christians see this and they seem surprised that atheists can do good, I've asked them, well, you don't think atheists can be good? And every one of them will say, well, yeah, of course you can. But.
There's always the but.
And the but gets back to, you're not really good, or you're not good in the way that we think God would have you be good, but you can do good things. Okay, then explain to me why Psalms 14:1 says that I can't do a good thing.
Exactly.
And that's when you get into the apologetics of, well, that doesn't really mean that you're incapable of doing good. That would be absurd. I'm glad you think it's absurd.
But they still think that the goodness that we have comes from the moral capital.
Yes.
You know, that moral capital.
You're borrowing from their worldview.
We're borrowing. I've had, I mentioned this on one of my episodes before, a girl that I was having a dialogue with, she's a Christian, and she said, well, of course you can be good, but your goodness, being a humanist and atheist, is from, you've hijacked it or stolen it from Christianity.
How does she know that Christianity didn't hijack these traits of humanity that existed and codify them and get some of them wrong? Because if you want to say that we're hijacking the good aspects of religion, then you need to look at the entire book and the entirety of religion and say, here's 100 things that we all agree are good, which happen to be in your book. Here's 50 things that we think are evil. You and I both agree are evil that are in your book and advocated. And neither one of us support those. So I'm not borrowing from your worldview. We happen to agree on some things that are fundamental to the nature of being human beings sharing space on this planet. And your book advocates for slavery or misogyny or any number of other things that you don't agree with. So of all the people who are picking and choosing from your book, it would seem that you are, because you've picked out the things you agreed with, got rid of the things you don't agree with, or explained them away. I didn't have to know about your book, read your book, or go into it at all to pick out this idea that perhaps it works better for me to try to be kind to someone, to offer assistance to someone. I didn't need a God to tell me that it's wrong to kill people. All I needed was a desire to live and the recognition that I have to share space with other people. And that automatically gets you to, it's better if you and I agree that we're not going to kill each other, and get a bunch of other people together who agree that we're not going to kill each other, and work together to make sure that we instill this value in other people and take action against those who oppose it.
Good.
That's it. That's all you need. The foundations of morality, and I gave a whole talk about the superiority of secular morality, about how secular moral systems have the goal of getting better at getting better. They don't make appeals to the supernatural or divine authorities. They only appeal to the facts about reality. And all you need are some simple, and ultimately they could be arbitrary, foundational views. Because if you believe that life is generally preferable to death, generally, we're just going to use it as a general rule, and health is generally preferable to sickness. Well, now you've got two pillars, which we'll acknowledge could be wrong. Maybe death is preferable to life. I don't think so, but we can at least begin there. If you started with death is preferable to life, you might find that you go extinct really quickly. And since extinction is clearly not in our best interest, or at least it would seem that it's not, because you're not here to have anything good, we can go with that life is preferable to death. Then ultimately somebody comes back and says, but what if you're so sick and in such pain in the quality of your life that death becomes preferable to life? Then in that situation, death is preferable to life, and that's why I'm fine with death with dignity. I'm fine with assisted suicide, but I also think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we are actually considering cases where, yes, the quality of this person's life is terrible and there is no hope of improvement in a terminal case.
Excuse me, that gets into situational ethics too, doesn't it?
I think that there are absolute morals only in the sense that for any specific situation, there's a finite set of actions and some subset represents the best possible actions. But I don't think that is absolute for that situation. I am fully an advocate for situational ethics. That you can't just make simple things like thou shalt not kill. So if we understand that thou shalt not kill is not particularly robust, it doesn't really tell us anything useful. It is simply just a command not to kill. And what we've learned is that there are occasions where killing might be necessary, situations where it may actually be the best possible thing. Then obviously the God who said thou shalt not kill is wrong. That it's oversimplified. But it gets worse than that when you get to the Bible, because you have thou shalt not kill and then specific instructions to run around killing people.
Numbers 31 and all the others,
And so what you have, and I'm fine with the idea that you have a general rule and then a specific rule that overrides it, or an older rule and a newer rule that overrides it. That's the way amendments and things work. But to just say, thou shalt not kill, tells me nothing that I didn't already know. That's not almost... I wouldn't say it's part of like genetic memory, but it's almost intuitive. I don't want to die. Probably best if I discouraged people from killing people, because that keeps me alive and it keeps the people I care about.
Too. I mean, we've learned that as a species. 200,000 years now, I think, prior to religions and Christianity.
I did a talk show, a podcast with this guy just a month or so ago, and he was a Christian. He was confused about a number of things. He was very conspiracy theory minded. And he spent a lot of time talking about one world government. And I completely blew his mind when I said that I don't think that a one world government's necessarily a bad thing. He was like, what? How can you stomach putting so much power in one place? And I was like, wait a minute. I didn't say I put all power in one place. I still believe in governments derived from the people. This idea that there's me and the government as separate things is false. At least in the United States, where we are part of the government. We are part of the process. We can run for office. Now, maybe it's practically impossible for me to get elected to any high office now. I get that. But I don't, the people who are terrified of the New World Order and the one world government, they seem to be forgetting that we have a one nation government with a one state government underneath it, with a one county government or principality government beneath it. That you could have a tiered system where everybody is participating, where you have proper checks and balances, and still have it govern the entire world. And by breaking down borders to where we recognize that the tribe of our tribalism is humanity. I don't see that is, not only do I not see that that's a bad thing, I think it's a good thing. Is there any guarantee that we'll do it right? No. None at all. Is there a guarantee that we're more likely to do it right if we begin with a humanist model than a religious model? Absolutely.
My country is the world, my race is human, my religion is to do good. I want to end it in just a few minutes here, but I do want to talk about, or go ahead and let's talk about your future endeavors and what's going on with you and your activism. And I do appreciate all you do, by the way. And I think we in the atheist community should be encouraging one another, because we all have our gifts. Like we used to say in the Christian circles, the 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the gift of the Spirit. But we are genetically different. We have different abilities. So that's called the division of labor, which I try to explain to my Christian viewers, that we don't need a God for that. We all have different abilities. But Matt's involved with many activism movements and things in the atheist community. So kind of tell my viewers what's going on with what you're doing. I know you're even writing a, can I talk about your book?
I'm working on a book because I get asked that all the time, but yeah. So for 10 years I've been hosting the Atheist Experience Show. It's a live call-in show, so that's a lot of conversations. They don't always go well. I'm not always the best person for a particular call. I have been arrogant and dismissive on occasion, and I have been accused of having the patience of a saint on other occasions. The number of times, basically pick out a week, and depending on how the calls go, somebody might say, oh, I believe in God now because you have so much patience, or I don't know how you can do this, or you were a complete jerk to this caller. And these are, I've taken the feedback and consider it. My primary goal is to get results. My primary goal is to have the sort of conversation that encourages people to question what they believe, to think about why they might believe it. And so I'm going to continue doing the TV show, The Atheist Experience, but about almost 2 years ago, I lost my software job. And everybody was like, you should do atheism full time. And I had to remind them that there's not really money in doing that. It's not like Campus Crusade for Christ has this massive mega millions budget, which dwarfs all atheist organizations combined. And that's just one, campus group. But I've been working on the Atheist Debates Project, which is about I create videos that teach people how to understand the sort of arguments and topics. It's not just, here's the ontological argument, here's the teleological argument. There's a lot of things with regard to the conversations that we're going to have. And it's basically like a brain dump for me. This is how I think about these things after years of doing the show. If they turn out to be beneficial to people, great. If not, then, I'm sorry, but hopefully they've pointed you in a direction where you can get more assistance. I'm working on a book called If I Were God, which takes a slightly different approach at addressing the questions that we talk about a lot. And my hope is that the book is accessible and interesting for both theists and atheists.
Yes.
If I were God, why would I create anything in the first place? If I decided to do this, what would my reasons be? How would I interact with my creation? Would I interact at all? What would I expect of them? What would I be hoping to gain out of this? And all the questions that we ask in different ways, and see, does the world make sense under any of the proposed answers? Is there any complete answer that really makes sense with what we witness? And I'm hoping to start a new show that is I'm shooting it probably 30 minutes with me, and I'm going to start with preachers, if I can get them to agree.
Wow, I'm getting excited now.
Just a 30-minute conversation with me and some believer, not just random person from a church, but somebody who's a preacher, somebody who's an evangelist, an apologist. Have a conversation about what they believe and why, and what I think about that, and vice versa. What are their views on atheists? Maybe 30 minutes. And
a formal debate?
No, not. Now, I love formal debates. I do a lot of them.
Yeah, you do.
And they're my favorite thing, provided they're done right. I don't like the debate structure that we end up using most of the time comes from scored competition debates. You have opening, second opening, rebuttal. It just becomes, to take a statement from the West Wing, a joint press conference. Where neither one of us actually needed to show up. We could have written our statements and sent them in, and then the only thing that we need to work on the fly is like a rebuttal and a closing. I want debates that are more conversational, where you present your position and I present my position, and then we have a discussion, a complete cross-examination where the time belongs to the person who's asking the questions, because that allows you to interrupt without being rude. So if I ask you a question, I can now, it's my time, I can interrupt you. And if I'm doing it to keep you from making a good point, then we trust that the audience can see that.
Right.
And if I'm doing that to keep you from derailing the conversation down a rabbit hole, then we trust that they can see that. And having those kind of conversations, getting feedback from the audience so that it is more of a discussion than a debate, but still a debate, not just butting heads, not just a phone call where somebody like me can hang up on somebody, which I do. And people are like, oh, you can't be for real discussions because you hang up on people.
Well, not often. You don't do that often. I watched it.
It depends.
Yeah.
I try to make sure that people get as good as they give on the show. Yeah. And if you are only calling in to preach, you can call in some other show and do that.
Right.
And if you make an argument and it's a rebuttal is offered and you offer no acknowledgement of it, you instead go on to your next point, now you're not having an honest conversation. And we have 6 phone lines now on the TV show. There's always somebody waiting to get in, and that's the problem. It's the benefit and the problem of doing a TV show like The Atheist Experience. You're trying to get information out. You're trying to have discussions. Right. And I've had phone calls that lasted 45 minutes. And I've had phone calls that lasted a couple seconds. So the host is always in this position of trying to make a determination.
Right.
But going forward, I want to do more debates. I want to keep working on the Atheist Debates Project. And I'm working with a number of different organizations to address issues within the atheist community. I'm on the board of directors for American Atheists, but apart from that, I'm not tied to any organization. And there are lots of questions that come up, How much should we focus on issues beyond the God question? What sort of intersectionality issues should we use? Should we be supportive of feminism? Should we use that label? Do we have positions on other issues? And how do we do a better job of making sure that the atheist community is a community where people are not only welcome, but encouraged to participate, regardless of their race, their gender identity, any number of issues, so that we build a more cohesive community. And this is difficult because we don't all agree on everything, and we're not going to.
And we're free thinkers. We form opinions based on reason.
And there are a lot of people who are coming out of churches who don't want anything to do with organizations. They don't want to donate money. They don't want to go to anything that even feels remotely like a church.
Like a church, yeah.
And that's sad in a sense because churches co-opted aspects of what makes us human.
Yes.
We are communal creatures.
Yeah.
We live in the interactions with each other.
Yes.
We cooperate to do things. Sadness from being segregated and alone and compartmentalized away from everybody else is one of the biggest issues. It's one of the reasons people don't leave religions because they might lose their entire support network.
Sure.
If we don't have something similar to that, then we have failed. And that's the type of thing that I'm going to continue supporting moving forward.
I think that's beautiful. There is a lack of that in the atheist community.
We're getting better.
Yes.
There was no community. There were a bunch of old bearded white guys talking trash about religion for many, many years. And now we're getting to where there are organizations like Recovering from Religion that help people deal with this process. There's the Secular Therapist Project, and also individual therapists like Dr. Marlene Winnell, who coined the term religious trauma syndrome. Because while some of your viewers may not get this at all, I grew up in a very loving Christian family. There was no trauma for me coming out of it. There was an awakening, a recognition of this. But other people, not all religion is practiced in the same way. And I hear from kids who have been thrown out of their homes, cut off from their families. And when I tell my mom hears about stuff like that, her response is, well, that doesn't seem very Christ-like to me. That's not very loving. We're going to love you no matter what. Even if we think you are working for Satan and leading people to hell, we are still going to love you because that's what we're called to do. Not everybody is the same way. And so there are people who find themselves having in a position where they've lost everything. I hear from people all the time, I'm the only atheist in my town. No, you're not. You're not even close to the only atheist. And sometimes I hear it from people in towns where there are 2 or 3 or more atheist groups, secular organizations. And so communicating this, getting the word out to people, and building places where everybody can come. And You don't necessarily have to agree on everything. You don't have to necessarily agree on every political thing. But if you are a secular person, if you are a non-believer, if you are in advocating for coming to humanist organizations, if you want the social structure, you have Sunday Assembly and Oasis and other things, all of these things should be welcome. We shouldn't let religions get away with taking the best elements of who we are and claiming that they are exclusively theirs.
Yeah, and they get credit for that.
Because they're not.
They take credit,
One of the biggest problem is one of perception. Religions have had a privileged status in the United States and in the world for thousands of years. Where they have a tax-free status, they have loads of money, they have an incentive for people to donate, and they do plenty of good things. They build hospitals, although the hospitals are pretty profitable. They help the homeless, which we're also doing with atheists helping the homeless. They have a number of these resources that they think all come from God. And from what I see, the reality is that you have good people doing good things. Some of them are giving credit to their religion, and the religions are happily accepting that credit on behalf of their God. And some of us say you can remove that step entirely, do good things, take credit, don't. Either way, do good things.
Exactly. Very good. Yeah, I could go on and on with Matt today, but I think we're going to close right now. And I just want to say one thing. I appreciate all the work that you've done in the atheist community, your debates, and I think it's very, very beneficial, especially for people that are new to being an atheist. You can watch the Atheist Experience podcast. I guess that's what it's called. I know a lot of new atheists need to find answers. They need to find different communities of free thinkers and atheists and humanists and secularists. But the Atheist Experience is a very good place to find information. So thank you for all that you do.
Sure, thank you.
And your other cohorts. I can name a lot of other people that do what Matt does. And we need to provide information. So there are those of us that do believe in giving information to Christians and also to fellow atheists. And as I always say, Christians will never know that you can be good without a God. They will never know that life goes beyond, or can go beyond, mythological concepts like any other, like Christianity or other religions. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to offer believers a way out, and you can progress in life without supernatural beliefs, and there is an alternative to Christianity. So thank you once again for coming on my show and giving a wonderful interview. So thank you for watching my show, The Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. We will see you next time.